I used to think the hardest part of a toxic relationship was the pain. It wasn't. The hardest part was missing the person who caused it. And that's when I realized something terrifying. I wasn't in love. I was emotionally dependent. There was a time in my life when I genuinely believed I had found the one person who understood me better than anyone else. That's what I told myself anyway. Because when you're emotionally dependent on someone, you don't call it that. You call it connection. You call it chemistry. You call it love. And that's how it starts. Not with obvious control. Not with threats. Not with some dramatic warning sign that screams, "Run." It starts with relief. That's what nobody tells you. The most dangerous people don't always enter your life like chaos. Sometimes they enter like comfort. And when I met them, that's exactly what they felt like. They knew what to say. They knew when to text. They knew how to make me feel seen in ways I didn't even realize I had been starving for. At first, it felt small, almost innocent. They remembered details other people forgot, the kind of coffee I liked, the exact song I mentioned once in passing, the story about my childhood I never repeated. They listened carefully. Or at least, it felt like they did. And when someone makes you feel deeply understood, you lower your guard faster than you think. Because most of us are not looking for danger. We're looking for home. That was my first mistake. I confused being emotionally recognized with being emotionally safe. And those are not the same thing. At first, they made me feel special, like I was different from everyone else. They would say things like, "I've never opened up to anyone like this before." Or, "You get me in a way nobody else does." And I'm embarrassed to admit how powerful that felt. Because once you believe someone sees a version of you that others don't, you start wanting to protect that bond. You start prioritizing it. You start fearing what happens if it disappears. That fear is where emotional dependence begins. Not obsession, not weakness. Fear. The fear of losing the person who became your emotional oxygen. And I didn't notice it happening. That's the scary part. No one wakes up and says, "Today I'm going to lose my emotional independence." It happens gradually, quietly, the way night replaces day, 1 hour at a time. At first, I just wanted to talk to them more. Then I wanted their opinion on everything. Then their reassurance started mattering more than my own judgment. Then one day, I realized something had shifted. A good day was no longer a day where I felt peaceful. A good day was a day where they were warm with me. That's when your emotional center of gravity moves. And once it moves outside of you, you're in danger. Because now, your peace has an owner. I remember the first time they pulled away. It was subtle, nothing dramatic. They just became colder, slower to reply, less affectionate, less available. And I hated how quickly I felt it. I checked my phone constantly, reread old messages, wondered what I did wrong, tried to retrace every conversation like a detective investigating my own failure. That's when I learned one of the darkest truths about emotional dependence. The person who gives you the most relief can become the same person who controls your anxiety. Think about that. If someone becomes your main source of validation, comfort, and emotional stability, then the moment they withdraw it, your whole internal world shakes. That's power, and not always the loud kind. Sometimes power looks like a delayed text, a shorter response, a colder tone, a slight shift in energy that makes you panic. Because if your nervous system has attached itself to someone else's approval, even their silence feels like punishment. And I started changing. Slowly. I became more careful around them, more eager to please, more afraid to upset them. I told myself I was being understanding, patient, supportive. But really, I was adapting to instability. I was learning their moods like survival cues. I knew when they sounded distant. I knew when they wanted attention. I knew when to apologize, even when I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. That's another hidden part of emotional dependence. It turns you into someone hyper-attuned to another person, while becoming disconnected from yourself. You stop asking, "How do I feel?" and start asking, "How do I keep this from falling apart?" That shift changes everything, because the relationship stops being about connection. It becomes about maintenance, emotional maintenance, damage control, and the worst part, you start calling that love. I did. I thought love meant staying through confusion. I thought love meant proving I wouldn't leave. I thought love meant being patient enough to earn consistency. But emotional dependence teaches you to romanticize instability. It makes the highs feel deeper because the lows are so painful. And that cycle can become addictive. That's not just poetic, it's psychological. When someone alternates affection with distance, your brain starts clinging harder to moments of reward. You don't relax into love, you chase it. And anything you have to chase for too long starts to feel more valuable than it really is. That's why emotional dependence can feel so intense. Not because the bond is healthy, but because unpredictability magnifies craving. The same way uncertainty can make people obsess over a gamble. It can make you obsess over a person. I didn't understand that at the time. I just thought I miss them more than normal people miss someone they care about. I thought maybe I was loyal, maybe deeply attached, maybe just sensitive. But no. I was becoming dependent on the emotional relief they occasionally gave me. And that occasional relief was enough to keep me trapped. That's how it works. Not constant kindness. Inconsistent kindness. That's what hooks you. Because when someone is good all the time, you feel safe. When they're good only sometimes, you feel obsessed. And obsession is easier to mistake for love than people realize. There was one night I remember too clearly. We had barely spoken all day. I was anxious, distracted, unable to focus on anything. I kept telling myself not to reach out again because I didn't want to look needy. So I waited, and waited, and waited. Then finally, late that night, they sent one message. Just one. Something simple. "Miss you." That was it. 2 words, and I felt instant relief, like all the tension in my body melted at once. That moment should have scared me, because my entire emotional state changed over 2 words from one person. 2 words. That's all it took to restore me. That's not love. That's dependency. When someone can destabilize you and then calm you with the smallest gesture, you're no longer connected. You're conditioned. And once I say it like that, it sounds obvious. But inside it, it never feels obvious. It feels personal. It feels emotional. It feels And that's why people stay. Not because they're stupid. Not because they enjoy suffering. But because dependence doesn't feel like a cage when you still believe the person holding the key also holds your healing. That's the illusion. You think the person hurting you is also the only one who can make it stop. So instead of leaving, you lean in harder. You explain yourself more. You become softer, more available, more forgiving. You offer more of yourself in hopes of getting stability back. But the more dependent you become, the less power you have to see clearly. Because now you need the relationship to be real. You need it to mean something. You need the pain to have a purpose. Otherwise, you have to face something devastating. That you were draining yourself to keep alive a bond that only survived by starving you. That realization broke me. Not instantly, but slowly. Because part of me still defended them. That's another sign of emotional dependence people don't talk about enough. You protect the person who destabilizes you. You minimize what they do. You explain it away. You say they're just stressed, just hurt, just afraid. And maybe sometimes that's even true. But someone's pain does not cancel the damage they cause. And I had to learn that the hard way. The turning point came from something small. It always does. Not a huge betrayal, not a dramatic ending. Just a moment so clear it slices through the fog. I was talking to a friend one afternoon, trying to explain why I felt so exhausted all the time. And without thinking, I said, I just need them to be okay with me, so I can feel okay again. The second those words left my mouth, everything went quiet. Because I heard it, really heard it. I had handed someone else the responsibility for my emotional stability. No, that's not even accurate. I had handed them the authority over it. That's different. Responsibility sounds mutual. Authority is control. And the moment your well-being depends on someone else's unpredictable approval, you are no longer loving freely. You are surviving emotionally. That hit me harder than anything they had ever done. Because for the first time, I stopped looking at them and started looking at what had happened to me. How I had become anxious. How I had become smaller. How I kept abandoning my own needs to stay connected. How I was more afraid of losing them than losing myself. That's the true cost of emotional dependence. It doesn't just keep you attached to the wrong person. It disconnects you from your own internal compass. You stop trusting what hurts. You stop respecting what drains you. You stop leaving when you should. Because your need for emotional relief becomes stronger than your instinct for self-protection. And once I understood that, I realized something even darker. Emotional dependence is rarely built by accident. Some people know exactly what they're doing. They study your insecurities. They notice what you lack. They identify the emotional need beneath your personality. The need to be chosen. The need to be reassured. The need to be enough. And once they find it, they feed it. Strategically. Not always consciously, but strategically. They give you just enough closeness to become attached. Then enough distance to become afraid. Then enough warmth to keep you invested. This creates a cycle. Hope, anxiety, relief, repeat. And the more you repeat that cycle, the harder it becomes to leave. Because now you're not just attached to the person, you're attached to the pattern. Your mind starts believing the reward is always one more effort away, one more conversation, one more apology, one more chance. That belief can destroy years of your life. It almost destroyed mine. I wish I could tell you I walked away the moment I understood all this. I didn't. Awareness is not always freedom. Sometimes it's just the first wound that tells you where the poison is. Leaving took time, because even after I saw the pattern, my body still reacted to them. I still wanted the text, still wanted the reassurance, still wanted one clean moment that would make everything make sense. But closure is dangerous when you seek it from the person who created the confusion. Sometimes the reason you can't move on is because you're asking the wrong person to restore your clarity. I had to learn to sit inside that discomfort without running back. That was brutal. Because emotional dependence doesn't end the day the relationship ends. It ends the day you stop needing them to regulate what you feel. And that takes work, real work. I had to stop interpreting absence as proof of my worth. I had to stop confusing longing with love. I had to stop seeing intensity as intimacy. And most of all, I had to rebuild something I didn't realize I had lost. My emotional self-trust. That's the part manipulators, toxic partners, and controlling personalities quietly erode first. Not your freedom, your self-trust. Because once you stop trusting your own feelings, boundaries and perceptions. You become easier to shape, easier to keep, easier to return to the same pain wearing a different excuse. I started noticing strange things after I pulled back. How calm felt unfamiliar, how peace felt boring, how I almost missed the anxiety because it had become proof that something mattered. That's how deep it goes. Sometimes healing feels empty at first because your body got used to chaos. And when you've lived too long in emotional instability, peace can feel like absence instead of safety. That's why people relapse into toxic bonds, not because they forgot the damage, but because their nervous system mistakes familiarity for love. That realization changed my life because it made me stop asking, "Why do I still want them?" and start asking, "What in me was trained to need this?" That question is dangerous in the best possible way because it shifts the focus from the manipulator to the wound they attach themselves to. And that's where real healing starts. Not just avoiding toxic people, understanding why their behavior worked on you. For me, the answer was painful. I had unresolved loneliness, a deep fear of abandonment, a quiet belief that love had to be earned through endurance. So when someone came into my life and made me feel chosen, then unstable, then chosen again, it activated every weak spot I had hidden. And I thought I was fighting for the relationship. But really, I was fighting to repair something much older. Something they didn't create, only exploited. That's the hidden psychology of emotional dependence. It's never just about the person. It's about the unmet need they learned how to control. And once you see that, the entire illusion changes. Because now the question is no longer, "How do I get them back?" It becomes, "Why did losing them feel like losing myself?" That question saved me, because the answer led me back to the part of me I had abandoned, the part that wanted peace more than intensity, consistency more than chemistry, truth more than fantasy. And slowly, I came back, not all at once, but enough to notice the difference. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes, stopped rehearsing conversations in my head, stopped needing their mood to determine my worth. And one day, I realized something I never thought I'd feel. I felt neutral, not heartbroken, not hopeful, just free. And that terrified me for about 2 seconds, until I realized freedom always feels strange when you've been emotionally chained. So, if you're listening to this right now, and there's someone in your life you can't seem to detach from, someone who hurts you, confuses you, withdraws from you, then pulls you back in, ask yourself one brutal question. Do I love this person? Or have I become emotionally dependent on the relief they give me after the pain they cause? Because those are not the same thing. Love does not require emotional starvation. Love does not train you to beg for basic reassurance. Love does not make you feel like peace is something another person can give or take away on a whim. That's not love. That's control disguised as intimacy. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The hardest part is accepting that the person you miss may not be the person who was real. It may be the version of them your nervous system became addicted to chasing. That fantasy is powerful, but it is still a fantasy. And healing begins the moment you stop calling dependence devotion. I wish someone had told me that earlier. Maybe I would have left sooner. Maybe I would have suffered less. But then again, maybe some lessons only make sense after they break you open. All I know is this: the day I stopped waiting for them to make me feel okay was the day I started becoming dangerous to people like them. Because emotionally dependent people are easy to control, but people who can regulate their own worth, people who can walk away from inconsistency, people who no longer confuse longing with love, those people are almost impossible to manipulate. And if you're rebuilding that version of yourself right now, good. because that version is the one they were always afraid of. If this story felt a little too personal, that's probably because emotional dependence hides in places most people still call love. Subscribe if you want more stories that expose the psychology behind manipulation, control, and toxic attachment. And in the comments, tell me this: have you ever missed someone who was actually destroying your peace? Because that answer says more than most people realize.